Alrighty, hello history students, world history students. We are on to our second lecture of the week. Sorry, got a few lectures lined up this week, and this one's on, not sorry, it's exciting. No. All right, Germanic conversion, because we're talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, and partly due to these Germanic invasions from the other parts of Europe and Asia, and we're going to look at how did Christianity respond to it. So here we go. First point. Let's talk about strategies. So how did they, as you began, so one of the main ideas of the fall of Rome is that the political structure of Rome, the empire, the administration, even the law system, those collapse. But what remains is the church. The church had been adopted by or legalized by Constantine. It had grown in prominence from about 313 AD until around 476 when it collapsed. So when Rome collapses, there's still the church. There's still a pope in Rome. There's still bishops in many of these cities, even though they're now full of these outsiders, these barbarians. And so what arises during this moment is this powerful move of evangelism, that we've got to reach out, we've got to convert. We're not, maybe we were Romans or we're loyal to Rome, but we're first and foremost, we're Christians, and we need to reach out to these new peoples and convert them. They had five basic strategies. One was accommodation. That was where they would take the current pagan beliefs of the barbarians, and they would try to say, look, here's how that works with the Christian teaching. Here's how what you may have worshipped this way, you can still celebrate this festival, but now it's to Jesus. And they would try to accommodate their old beliefs while transitioning them to the new Christian faith. They used reasoning. They used logical arguments, and they would go and they would appeal to logic as much as they could to try to show why the God of the Bible was more worth serving or more likely real than the other ones, than their pagan gods. They would focus on the leaders because these were tribal societies. They knew if they could get the leader or the chief to convert, then all of his followers or his people would convert along with him. So that could lead to mass conversions. There's stories of supernatural demonstration. Just that means miracles. They would use miracles to show the reality and the power of the Christian God. And then at other times, though a lot of times this is what people think is the only thing that happened, as there was simply force. They defeat them in battle, and then it would say, well, you can either become slaves, or you can either be destroyed, or become our prisoners, or you can convert to Christianity and become allies. And so sometimes being converted at the point of a sword definitely did happen, though it was only one of five methods of this evangelical movement among the Christian church following the fall of Rome. Strengths of their methods. The mass conversions were quick and they spread quickly, so that was helpful. It wasn't a matter of convincing hundreds or thousands. If you could convince the right people, you'd get these mass conversions. If you got the loyalty to the leaders, then all of a sudden that represented political loyalty to Rome, to the faith, and to the Pope. Again, by becoming Christian, now all of a sudden now they could be, instead of becoming attackers or even just indifferent to the church, they could become protectors of the church and supporters of the Pope. And when they didn't force people, like accommodation, when they didn't force them to convert right away, but they kind of accommodated their old beliefs, that allowed people to transition from their old way of life to a new Christian. And it got kind of messy and muddy in the middle sometimes, where they were kind of part pagan and part Christian. But to just completely say, oh, I'm going to completely change my entire worldview and I'm going to completely burn and cast aside my old beliefs and enter something new, that could lead to a lot of cultural alienation. This idea that you no longer know what your identity is, you no longer have any ties to your past or your old people. And so that there was a wisdom or a strength to this gradual influencing over time of Christianity versus saying, no, change and convert in every way right now. And so these were all strengths of the five strategies that I just mentioned. Some of the weaknesses were there definitely was at times a compromise of Christian and pagan values. I got the silly pictures here where they depicted Jesus. Again, these were a lot of times war-based or military-based tribes, and so they would depict Jesus and they would emphasize him as a conquering hero. They emphasize him as a warrior. They would basically take a picture of their mightiest God and say, let's just slap Jesus' face on that. So we got Rambo Jesus there. And then the pagans could go, or the Germans could go, okay, I can get on board with that. If he's a cool fighting dude who slays and his robes dripped in the blood of his enemies, okay, I'm on board. But that oftentimes led to maybe a skewed or unpolished or unrefined or incomplete view of the Christian gospel among the Germans. The other weakness was a lot of times, again, you can convert the chief, and that could lead to political loyalty. It could also lead to mass conversions, but that's a political decision. It's not a personal relationship. I'm being saved. I'm a Christian. I'm being baptized because my boss is, and because otherwise I'm out of the tribe, or he's going to kill me, or I'll be an outsider. Versus I know Jesus. I've been born again. I've had an experience, and I'm transformed from the inside out. And so there was, again, potentially a lack of sincerity in a lot of these conversions that led to some muddy demonstrations of what it really meant to be a Christian. Which is why a lot of times you can look back at some of these societies and be like, they said they were Christian, but look what they were doing. Well, that's because this process was all taking place. And like you and me, if we're honest, it was a little messy. Just an example of this Christian accommodation, you'll have people where they'll have these pagan gods like Isis here, and then they'll see the statue of Jesus, and they'll say, you see, your God isn't original. It's just basically based upon the old gods. Well, when you see those things, they're actually intentional, because that was the strategy of the church to couch the new faith in whether the symbolism or the celebration or the events of the old religion. And they were trying to slowly accommodate and turn, not to basically make up and copy them, but to say, no, this is like what you used to do, but here's what it is. And again, sometimes that led to compromise, but it also led to a smoother transition and less cultural alienation. And so you have all these on the left in the red, you have all the Christian holidays, the church holidays, and they fall upon these other pagan celebrations. That doesn't mean they were just kind of made up or invented, or even that was on purpose. That was directly their strategy to take, okay, instead of celebrating the winter solstice, you're going to celebrate Christmas. Instead of celebrating Samhain, you're going to celebrate All Hallows Eve, on and on and on. And so this is just an example when you see that of, you can see the days of the week are even named for Thor's Day and Freya's Day and Saturn's Day. They're named for pagan worship, but again, the church saw this need to accommodate in order to reach out to these people and begin to get them closer to the gospel. We're going to look at in the last 2 points, so those are their 5 strategies, strengths and weaknesses, of converting these Germanic tribes. The ones we saw in the last lecture overran the Roman Empire, and now the church is saying, well, okay, here's the new reality. Let's get them saved. We're going to look at 2 key groups. The first is the Franks, in what we would think of as modern-day France. And their story really begins with the conversion of Clovis. Shout out to all the Central Valley people who've been to or visited Clovis, named for a Germanic chieftain, Frankish, who was an early convert to Christianity. He was a pagan, but his wife became Christian. And I put there, it's a common theme in history, because you have a lot of people where, again, the wife is more sensitive and spiritual, and she gets saved, and then it's her influence on her family, or particularly on her husband, that has great effect. But anyway, they have a baby who is very sick, and the baby, they pray to God, and she prays for the baby, and the baby's saved, and the baby recovers. And Clovis kind of takes note of that. Okay, my wife, who's this Christian, she prayed for our baby, and our baby survived. So he's out in battle one day with another tribe, and he's losing, and he's about to be overrun. We'll look at a quote in a second, and he cries out to the God of his wife, and the battle turns, and he becomes victorious, kind of like when we talked about Constantine. And he says, okay, I'm going to convert to Christianity because the God of my wife saved our child, and he now saved me in battle. And so Clovis converts, and he was the leader of this large Frankish tribe. And so over 3,000 of his followers convert along with him. And so that's what I mean by this mass conversion. And you immediately have this huge and prominent and powerful group that was once kind of a threat to Rome. With this conversion, now they become a political ally to Rome. And Clovis is the starting point of that. He's recorded during that battle that I mentioned. There's his wife as he heads out to battle, and their child in the background. He says, I've tried my gods. This is when he's in battle, and the battle's going poorly. And he says, I've tried all my gods, and they've deserted me. I call on thee, only save me. And so it's in that moment that he turns to the God of his wife and says, if you're real, save me. And he does. And then that leads to Clovis's conversion. And so he is famously baptized by the Pope in Rome, and where it's recorded that he says, bend thy neck, which is bowing down to be baptized, and he says, worship what you burned, i.e. the churches and the Bible and Christianity, and burn what you worshiped, your old idols, symbolizing his conversion along with all of his other Frankish followers to Christianity. Now, why focus on Clovis? Well, one, I think it's a pretty fun story if you ever read it in more detail, but also he's an example. But the Franks end up being kind of a central core group of conversions early on during this process. They plant the seeds of kind of the first Christian kingdom, following all these Germanic tribes all over the different remnants of the Roman Empire. They get this core. You can see the vast territory that they represented, and it's from Clovis's line that you're going to get what's kind of thought of as the first Christian king of Europe, a ruler named Charlemagne. And he's going to be descended from Clovis, and Charlemagne's going to provide a kind of the first centralized strength for the church. Again, Rome is just this tiny city surrounded by all these barbaric outsiders. The Franks under Clovis and then later Charlemagne become this place of protection and future expansion. Clovis goes on to battle and defeat various other Germanic tribes and force them and require them to convert. So he's this conversion force, but he's also a source of protection and stability for the Christian church there in Rome. Also, get to our last point here, you can see from Italy up through the north of France, it provides a corridor of Christian community up into England, from Rome to Britain. And England's going to be another one of these important hubs that we're going to talk about next for the conversion of the barbarians. And there we go. We have the last points on the Britons as a second example. So Clovis and the Franks, and then now we have the Britons, or what we would call, England, Scotland, and Ireland today. If you remember, Rome was in England. They were Romano-Christians because they were Roman. By the end of the empire, most of them would have been, at least politically, if not sincerely, Christians. England, like the rest of Rome, gets overrun by the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes and these other Germanic tribes, and Rome becomes another kind of pagan place. But during that, you actually get various missionaries, particularly from Scotland, who come down and they begin to convert the Britons in southern England, and so they begin to migrate. Rome begins to send some of its own missionaries up to England, and Britain begins to convert, and Britain becomes kind of a base of conversion for the rest of Europe. And we'll move on to the next slide to explain that. But you kind of get three major leaders who convert within England, who then have a larger impact outside of it. One is St. Augustine of Canterbury, not the same as the St. Augustine that we've read in class, but he's important because he begins the Benedictine monks group, and that's important because the monks, they weren't just sometimes you picture a bunch of monks hiding out in a monastery while barbarians ravage outside, and they're just writing in their little books, but they were significant because, one, they were writing in little books, they were copying manuscripts, they were copying the Bible, they were producing copies and literature, and that's it. They're preserving learning and knowledge. But no, they were actually missionary outposts, and they would go and they'd found a monastery and then use that as a beachhead to then reach out to these barbarian tribes. And so one of the leading missionary groups, these Benedictine monks, was actually an English convert named St. Augustine. You also have famously St. Patrick, who was a Roman Christian who gets kidnapped to Ireland again and gets, he converts in Ireland while he's a slave of the pagan Irish, and then later he goes back to England, but then goes back to Ireland, or he gets freed and goes back to England, becomes a bishop, but then says, I'm going to go back to Ireland, and he converts all of the Irish. And then that's kind of a complicated story, but Ireland eventually becomes a beachhead of converting a lot of England back to Christianity. But we'll talk about those details in class. But again, the main idea is that you have Britain becoming a major source of missionaries to the mainland of Europe during this time. And that example of that is St. Boniface, who again is an English missionary who heads to Europe and leads, large conversions in the Netherlands and other areas of Northern Europe. So England, although it's very remote, because of powerful missionaries like Augustine and Patrick, becomes a base of evangelism back to the continent of Europe. St. Patrick, if I be worthy, I live for my God to teach the heathen, even though they may despise me. And I have that one included, one, because again, St. Patrick was pretty awesome, and he really did almost single-handedly convert the island of Ireland. But the idea, this was the mindset of the church. The world is over. I mean, we talk about, you watch movies about the apocalypse. The fall of Rome was like that. The world, as they knew it, was over. It's not like there's no human beings, but society and civilization was over. But in the hearts of these Christians was the desire of, okay, I'm surrounded by heathen, I'm surrounded by very strange, different people. I'm going to go to them and I'm going to bring them the gospel however I can. And that's the story of Europe following the fall of Rome, is this movement of these Christians coming out of the wreckage and saying, okay, we're still left. Let's spread the gospel. St. Boniface, too, just powerful story. He went to I can't remember if it was the Netherlands or somewhere in Northern Europe. And this is an example of conversion by supernatural demonstration, is there was this sacred oak that the people were worshiping. And he walks right up to it. And the people say, don't touch it. If you touch it, that's where our God lives. You're going to die. And he goes, I'm not going to die. And he walks up to it, and they're all hiding because they're expecting him to be hit by lightning or something, or to die. So instead, he takes his axe and he chops down their sacred oak. And then a bolt of lightning comes out of the sky and strikes the oak and sets it on fire. And he turns to them and says, worship the true living God. And right then and there, the people watching, they convert. And so Boniface, becomes a powerful missionary, but he also is representative of this evangelism, in that during a later missionary, and when he was later in life, he ends up being a martyr, and he's killed by some of the very people that he's trying to convert. Not the same one as in the previous story, but again, a lot of these men laid down their lives in order to shed the gospel into this new European environment. Boniface, again, reflecting this missionary zeal. Let us not be dogs that don't bark, or silent onlookers, or paid servants who run away before the wolf. A lot of the Roman emperors, they were paid servants who ran away before the wolf. They deserted their people, they deserted their post, and it was these Christian priests, these Christian people, the Christian popes, or the pope or the bishops, who stood in the gap and said, no, we're going to stay, and we're going to respond. So he says, instead, let us be careful shepherds watching over God's flock, Christ's flock. Let us preach the whole of God's plan to the powerful and to the humble, to the rich and to the poor, to men of every rank and age, as far as God gives us the strength in season and out of season. And so this is just a period of time, again, in which a lot of I think a lot of times gets overlooked, in the powerful, sincere, supernatural effort made by these Christians after the fall of Rome to reach out to, again, what was maybe even their enemies. But they had the true gospel incentive to say, you know what, this is an opportunity, and and the world has changed. Europe has changed. America has changed. Western civilization has changed, because they said, you know what, we can't be dogs that don't bark, and we can't be silent onlookers. We've got to share the gospel. And so the impact, why we talk about Britain, is because it's going to be Britain that's going to be largely responsible for the spread of Western civilization. As we go through this class, you're going to see Britain becomes an important stronghold of biblical faith and biblical evangelism. It's going to be British monks who spread their monasteries all over Europe. A lot of them are Irish and Scottish. So we say, well, I'm saying British, I'm not saying English, but it's going to be their little outposts that spread, that evangelize, and not only evangelism, but also, as I mentioned, learning and education. Books are scarce, literacy is scarce, and it's these monks who are going to preserve a lot of that. And also, we're going to get into the power of the Pope there in Rome and the power of the Catholic Church. And England is always going to be a little different, because before the power of the Pope really rises, one of the first places to remain Christian, one reason because it was so far away, but also it's an outpost and it's an island, but England's always going to be a little independent from Rome. And you're going to see that as a recurring theme in our class as well. And that is, as eventually this European church solidifies into a centralized power, England's going to kind of be a little different, and have a slightly different approach, and that continues to this day. So what? Big ideas. The conversion of the Germanic tribes provides the spiritual, moral, intellectual, and political glue to hold Europe together. Again, what I want you to picture is the world. There is no such thing as Europe. There was the Roman Empire. It's gone. But the reason we have Europe is because what was left was Christianity. And at first, they were all these various tribes, different dialects, different customs. You saw the names on the last lecture of all the different peoples. But what's going to make them Europeans is the Christianity, is the fact that these groups, through the work of these missionaries, are going to convert. And it's going to be, you're going to have a lot of decentralized people doing, with lots of differences in different languages even, in Europe, but what they have in common, their common culture, beliefs, and values, is Christianity. And so, again, you want to really picture in the ashes of Rome, the phoenix, or what's left, is the church. And it's the church that survives and provides the glue that holds Europe together and what sets it apart from other regions around the world. There are troubling, the other thing to pull away is that the accommodation creates a mix of Christian pagan culture. It's not like, like any Christian culture, but it's not like it's very refined. You've got old influences mixing with these new influences, and there's troubling compromises. There's superstition. There's violence. There's idolatry. There's religion and tribe ties. Where again you're only a Christian because of your chief or the tribe you belong to. But all of that is kind of a refining process, and the emergence of Christianity in Europe, it's going to take time and generations and centuries, but it's going to have its play, and it's going to produce, and it's going to pull together a lot of the ideas of Judeo-Christianity and Greco-Roman culture that come to be Western civilization. And none of that would have been possible, and a lot of that could have been lost if it hadn't been for these missionaries who, again, in the ashes of their fallen society said, well, what we still have is the most important thing. We have the kingdom of God, and we're going to go and we're going to reach these new peoples, and we're going to preach the gospel. And what we enjoy today, our modern Western culture, is the result of that. Okay, long enough. We'll talk to you soon and get into some more detail on this in class.